She thought it was just another long shift, serving tables, keeping her head down, and trying to make ends meet. But then he walked in. A billionaire, dressed in power and pride, who saw her not as a person, but as someone to belittle. In front of everyone, his laughter cut deeper than words, mocking her identity, her very existence. Yet, what he didn't know was that she carried a strength he could never imagine. And when she finally responded, the entire room fell silent. For her, life was a constant balancing act. By day, she was a college student, chasing dreams that often felt just out of reach. By night, she worked double shifts at a small downtown restaurant, carrying trays heavier than most people realized, serving smiles she didn't always feel. She was used to the routine, the clinking of glasses, the buzz of conversations, the tired ache in her feet as midnight crept closer. But beyond the exhaustion, there was pride. Every dollar she earned meant she was one step closer to paying tuition, one step closer to proving that hard work could rewrite her story. Most nights, she went unnoticed, a face in the crowd, a voice drowned out by laughter and chatter. And, honestly, she preferred it that way. What she didn't know was that tonight would be different. The air felt heavier, the room louder, as if something unseen was waiting. And when a group of wealthy men walked in, led by a billionaire who carried arrogance like a crown, the energy shifted. She could feel their eyes before she heard their words. Something was coming, something that would test not just her patience, but her very dignity. At first, it seemed harmless. Just another group of wealthy customers laughing too loudly, demanding too much, leaving her scrambling to keep up. She'd seen it before, but there was something different about this table. Their laughter wasn't just careless. It was sharp, cutting, and aimed directly at her. The billionaire at the head of the table leaned back in his chair, his gold watch catching the light. His eyes followed her every move, not with interest, but with amusement, like she was part of some cruel joke only he understood. When she brought their drinks, he whispered something in Arabic, loud enough for his friends to hear. They burst into laughter. She didn't need a translation to understand it wasn't kind. Each trip back to their table felt heavier, like she was carrying more than just plates and glasses. She could feel the heat of their stares, the smirks, the deliberate pauses before ordering, waiting for her to approach so they could have their fun. The billionaire's words grew bolder, his tone sharper, each sentence dripping with mockery. And still, she stayed professional. She forced a smile, steadied her voice, and reminded herself she needed this job. Bills didn't care about pride. Tuition didn't wait for dignity. But the room was starting to notice. Other diners glanced over, sensing the cruelty hidden beneath. The laughter. The humiliation wasn't private anymore, it was public, on display. Then came the breaking point. As she set down their meals, the billionaire looked her directly in the eye and unleashed another string of Arabic insults, this time louder, harsher, with a confidence that dared her to respond. His friends roared with laughter, pounding the table, their arrogance echoing across the restaurant. Her hands trembled as she collected the empty tray, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent her whole life being told to stay quiet, to endure, to push through. But something inside her cracked. The sting of every insult, every dismissive glance, every time she'd been told she was less, all of it collided in that moment. The restaurant fell into a strange silence, the kind that comes right before a storm. She looked at him, really looked, not as a customer, not as a billionaire, but as a man who thought his wealth gave him power over her. And for the first time, she didn't lower her gaze. The billionaire smirked, leaning forward, ready with another cruel line. But he didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that the very language he thought would shield his insults was about to become his undoing. Her chest tightened as she set the tray down. The billionaire leaned in, his voice dripping with arrogance, and unleashed another string of Arabic insults, this time louder, sharper, crueler than before. His friends howled with laughter, pounding, their fists on the table as though the restaurant itself was their stage. The humiliation pressed down on her like a weight. Years of keeping quiet, of swallowing pain, of pretending words didn't hurt. All of it boiled to the surface. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed locked on his. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't going to be. And then she spoke. Fluent Arabic rolled off her tongue, clear, precise, and sharper than any insult he had thrown. Every syllable carried fire, every word slicing through the mockery he had built around her. His laughter froze mid-breath. His smirk collapsed into shock. Around the table, the grins faded, replaced by wide eyes and stunned silence. The restaurant turned to watch. Diners leaned forward, forks suspended mid-air, waiting. The billionaire, for the first time, looked small, his power stripped by the very language he thought would protect him. He tried to answer, stumbling over his words, but his voice faltered. She didn't raise her tone. She didn't need to. Her calm, commanding words cut deeper than shouting ever could. The arrogance in the room had shifted. The billionaire's face flushed with anger and shame as whispers spread through the crowd. And in that instant, the balance of power flipped. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one in control. The billionaire leaned back, speechless, his silence louder than any insult. And as the room erupted in applause, she realized something he never could. Dignity cannot be bought, and respect cannot be mocked into silence. The applause faded, but the silence that followed carried its own power. The billionaire, once so loud and untouchable, sat red-faced and defeated, unable to reclaim the arrogance he had worn like armor. His friends avoided her gaze, shrinking into their chairs, their laughter gone. For the first time that night, she wasn't the one being watched with pity. She was being seen with respect. She returned to her shift, steady and composed, though her hands still trembled from the adrenaline. It wasn't about winning an argument or embarrassing a man who thought money made him untouchable. It was about proving, to herself, to the room, and to anyone who had ever been mocked for who they are, that silence does not mean weakness. When she left the restaurant that night, the city lights felt different. The air carried a quiet triumph, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from reclaiming dignity. Yet, beneath that moment of pride, she knew this was bigger than her. This wasn't the first time someone like her had been belittled. It wouldn't be the last, because racism doesn't always come in shouts or violence. Sometimes it hides behind laughter, wealth, or jokes, spoken in languages meant to exclude, and too often, the world looks away, until someone dares to answer back. Her courage was more than a response. It was a reminder. No matter how powerful someone appears, cruelty cannot erase humanity. So the question is, how many more stories like hers will it take? How many more moments of humiliation, silence, and pain before the world finally learns to see every person with the respect they deserve?